DFS. It is Friday, October 21st here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 7 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. Jared, I appreciate you tearing yourself away from the first day of Midnights to sit down with me for our usual DFS pod.
I've given it a listen. Don't you worry. I gave it a listen this morning. It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
I've listened to pieces of it against my will throughout the day with various daughters playing it for me. I don't think it's going to be my favorite at any point. I'm not latching on to anything just yet.
Yeah, my daughter's not a fan yet, so it's just me wanting to listen myself. So
you're still at the point where you can voluntarily listen to it instead of having it forced upon you. It definitely changes the experience. So I've had it built up around me for weeks. I don't even know when it started. And let me tell you, there was a lot of disappointment in the house last night when I let the kids stay up for the sneak preview, and it was like a 1.5-minute commercial for the album.
Right.
Even the 13-year-old's like, that was not worth it. I should have gone to bed.
I haven't watched the videos yet. That's later tonight, I guess.
Oh yeah, the after hours stuff. And speaking of after hours, when you get this pod on a Friday night, it's beer time. I saw you have one. I got one here that's blending into the background, but
I got a pumpkin beer. It's that time of year.
It is that time of year. I got something from the Backwoods Bastard line of Founders beer. So yeah, we'll enjoy this one.
You'll be sleeping by the end of this.
Not a chance, baby. All right, so let's get into our picks for the DraftKings slate this weekend. What do you like for cash at quarterback, Jared?
I'm not sure yet, honestly. It's a tough week at quarterback. No Josh Allen, no Jalen Hurts. Lamar Jackson's on like a 3-game slump. Patrick Mahomes, tough matchup against San Francisco. I kind of want to play Geno Smith at $5,600, but Tyler Lockett seems legitimately questionable for this game. It seems like he re-injured that hamstring at some point, between last Sunday and now. So if Lockett is out, I don't think I can get to Geno in cash. I might go to Derek Carr at that point, who's only a few $100 more, and just kind of, the Raiders have the high implied total. I just kind of hope he has a decent game. I don't love the spot for him. I think it's going to be more of a Jacobs game, but honestly, I'm not sure where I'm going in cash at quarterback yet.
Can I say shout out to the Seahawks website for being one of the few in the league that does not do its injury report. Like, I went to the Seahawks injury report on their site. I see the Chargers, but I don't see the Seahawks. So how easy is it to just do that stuff, knowing how high profile a site you are? I'm with you. Geno Smith stands out at 5,600. I think I'd probably still lean that way, even if there's no Tyler Lockett, but I can't say that for sure now. I mean, honestly, Matt Ryan at 5,400, I have him down for tournaments here, but if we have no Lockett and the other things available in the 5K range, I don't think that he really stands out as being a much poorer bet for our cash lineups than other guys in that range. So that might be it, but it's definitely going to be one to sort out as we get into the weekend. We've got lots of other injury situations among skill players too that we have yet to talk about.
Yeah, and I would like to get up to Lamar in cash, and even Justin Herbert, who I'll talk about in the tournament section here, why I like him. But there's not a lot to me to like for cheap at the other positions. At running back and wide receiver, there's plenty of good cheap tight ends, but to me, it's tough to fit the expensive quarterbacks in cash lineups this week.
Yeah, I agree. I would rather pay down for Geno, and even without Lockett, we get him as 5-point underdogs. Maybe that even increases slightly. It's a neutral scoring matchup against the Chargers. I think the 5-point underdogs aspect could push passing volume upside here. And at least Geno Smith has been solid in real life quarterback play for us throughout the season so far. Even last week, he disappointed fantasy wise, but the game was fine other than not having any touchdowns. So he's at least been a guy that we can play and not be like, boy, I hope he doesn't implode in this game.
Right. Exactly.
So on the GPP side, I did already mention it. I have Matt Ryan at 5,400. He's projected for a quarter of Geno Smith's ownership, according to the numbers in our lineup generator right now. So that aspect makes it pretty easy for me to lean toward Matt Ryan for a tournament lineup. We've got Michael Pittman at 7,400, a little bit expensive, but that's got him in single digit range for ownership projection, which, certainly helps here as well. And then Alec Pierce for the double stack, 4,600, nice price for him, single digit ownership. If Matt Ryan is going to go off, and he already topped 350 in the first meeting with the Titans, so I don't have to say this could be his ceiling. I can point to it and say, well, that's his ceiling. He already did it once. If he does go off, he's probably taken two guys with him, and rather than play like 7 different Colts tight ends in one lineup slot here, I'll go Pittman and Alec Pierce.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor back for the Colts. So I don't expect them to go as pass heavy as they did last week, but for the price, I think Ryan could get there for you. GPP is where I do like going with the expensive quarterbacks. I mentioned Lamar Jackson, 3 straight disappointing games now. 2 of those came in tough matchups against the Bills and Bengals. Last week was not a tough matchup. He just kind of underwhelmed. Good matchup again this week against the Browns. Mark Andrews questionable. I think he's going to play. Rashad Bateman also questionable. I think he's trending towards playing. I think Bateman's return will be big for Lamar Jackson. I think that's part of the reason he struggled these last few weeks. So, Lamar Jackson on a slate without Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, like he has the potential to outscore all these other quarterbacks by like 5 to 10 points. And if he does that, he's probably the guy you're going to need for tournaments.
Yeah, it's tough to say that though with a questionable Mark Andrews and a questionable Rashad Bateman. I feel like you're getting a little bit Pete Carroll optimistic here. You're like, no, it'll be fine. He's great. Look at him around all these other guys.
I mean, the guy has 2 40-point games already this season. He has that ceiling. I like Justin Herbert here too. Good matchup here against Seattle. Obviously, 26th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. We'll see about Keenan Allen. That's kind of big for me if I want to use Herbert or if Allen's out, I might just end up using like just Mike Williams and just hope he gets 40% of Herbert's production. But because Josh Allen's out for the Chargers too, or sorry, Josh Palmer's out for the Chargers too. So if there's no Keenan Allen, it gets kind of thin in the pass catching core. But I do like Herbert. He's another guy who has shown us in the past he has that 30-point ceiling.
So bothered about Josh Allen being on bye this week that you're just going to put his name on every Josh in the site.
That's right.
Speaking of Joshes, let's move to running back for cash. And Josh Jacobs has to be a starting point for everybody in all fantasy formats right now. $6,500 coming off the bye, facing Houston. There's absolutely nothing to dislike about him this week. So I think right at the top of our chart in the lineup generator, we've got Josh Jacobs, we got Breece Hall 6,200, we got Kenneth Walker at 5,800. And I mean, to me, that's a nice looking trio to start out my the planning for my cash lineup on DraftKings this week.
Yeah, Josh Jacobs is a must for me. I think he's, 1,000 to 1,500 underpriced here just with the work he's been getting and this matchup against Houston and the Raiders, big home favorites. It's really a perfect spot for Josh Jacobs. To me, the last 2 spots, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Leonard Fournette, I also like too at $7,700. He's our 4th best dollars per point value. He has the higher raw projection than Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker. He is quite a bit more expensive, and it is kind of tough to fit him in lineups. I was working on my cash lineup this morning. So I am leaning towards Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker as my last 2 guys, just, guys getting RB1 level workloads that aren't really priced as RB1s on DraftKings yet.
Yeah, Breece Hall is already 14th in the league in opportunity share, according to our historical stats page. And that speaks to how much the Jets have been leaning on the backfield because Breece Hall, of course, has not been the lead back all season. It's been, 3 weeks now that he's been the lead back. And even that, it's not like he's a dominant workhorse. So there's a lot of work going to Jets running backs collectively, and he has taken over the top share of that. So that's why it's pretty easy to like him work-wise because he's going to be getting the ball whether they're ahead or behind in this game against Denver. Kenneth Walker, obviously not as good a bet for that receiving stuff, but he's 5,800. He's probably going to be a workhorse runner for Seattle. So as long as the game doesn't get out of hand, he should do well on touches.
Yeah, and Walker, the routes weren't great last week, but he got 3 targets, a 10% target share. If he can be around there, like that's good enough, I think, when he's also going to be getting 15 to 20 carries per week. And Walker has the awesome matchup, too, against the Chargers. Chargers allowing 5.8 yards per carry to running backs. Hall's matchup's okay. Denver's really good against the pass, just kind of average against the run. And especially with Russell Wilson banged up now, we'll see if he even plays. Like that's a game I think is going to be close, where the Jets should be able to continue leaning on the run for most of that game.
That game's going to be like 11-9. It's going to be awful to watch. Please, everybody, that's if you take nothing else away from the show, don't watch Broncos Jets. You can start players from it, but don't watch the game on Sunday.
Right.
EPP side, what do you like at running back?
So I think paying up for Austin Eckler is interesting. He's averaged 9 targets over the last 5 games now, 20% target share. And Seattle 31st in Football Outsiders running back coverage rankings. So I think Eckler could have a big day in the passing game. And the other guy I like, it feels gross, but Zeke Elliott for $6,000. CeeDee Lamb's going to be one of the most popular players, definitely the most popular wide receiver. So you get some leverage by playing Zeke instead of CeeDee Lamb. You hope Zeke gets the touchdowns. Like he's not an elite runner anymore, but I think he's still okay. He still, I think, projects for 15 to 18 carries in this game, and he gets a great matchup against the Lions. So again, doesn't feel great. You wish he was doing more in the passing game, but I think he could get 100 yards and a touchdown or two in this spot.
Yeah, I was listening to Josh Norris and Hayden Winks earlier, both guys that we're both fans of, both guys that we've had on the Draft Sharks podcast before, on the Underdog podcast, of course. And Josh was talking about Zeke Elliott this week. And I know that the thing that we dislike most about Zeke right now is the lack of targets, but he has been out there for passing situations. And Josh made a good point. It's like, now that Dak Prescott's back, if we are expecting the team to throw the ball more, we're probably also going to get more throws to the running backs. And Zeke has been out there in those situations. We're probably going to get more, traditional quarterback passing. That's probably going to at least help the target count some for Zeke. So I think there's a chance that aspect is not as bad going forward as it has looked so far, given that Zeke has been getting the clear lead back share of work so far. So I agree on Zeke, and I think that maybe he ends up looking even better than we can reasonably project right now.
Yeah, Zeke's run 40 more routes than Tony Pollard has. Zeke's over a 50% route rate. So you're right. It's not like he hasn't been out there running routes. The passes just haven't come his way. So that definitely could flip at any point.
One other point that Josh made, and I've always respected Josh Norris as a film guy, he was talking about Travis Etienne, and this is where I like taking a shot on Travis Etienne this week. 5,400 here, so he helps us with some of that salary space. Gets the Giants. The Giants are really big up front on their D-line this week. They have garbage at linebacker. So if you can get the ball past the front line, that's where the yards are coming from. The team has given up 3 100-yard rushing games so far to Christian McCaffrey, Tony Pollard, and Kenyon Drake. Guys that you can get past that front line, and then they have the speed to turn it into something. And those 3 games came on 15, 13, and 10 carries. So this has not been a defense that teams are loading up the run and just like pounding away for 5.5 yards a carry. It's a team that you try to scheme to get around that big defensive line. And Josh highlighted Etienne as a player who's physically built to beat this defense this week. The other thing we like is that he got his first start last week. Now, that's the thing it's possible to misread. So Etienne started over James Robinson last week. The final playing time wasn't like, oh, they went to Etienne this week. So I'm not sure what to make of that. That's what makes me hesitant to trust Etienne from like a full season, starting on my redraft roster thing. But if I'm making a GPP lineup, I'm getting him in single digits. I'm getting him against a defense that has been gashed by speed backs. I very much like the upside right here.
It does, and like you said, the playing time numbers don't necessarily bear it out, but it does feel like Etienne is kind of trending up and James Robinson's trending in the other direction. Think about Etienne too. I mean, not that he's had a great fantasy season, but he's averaging almost 75 total yards per game. He just hasn't scored yet. He has 67 touches without a touchdown yet. And I know Robinson's going to, probably get the majority of the goal line work, but Etienne's going to score touchdowns. I said it on yesterday's podcast. JaMychal Hasty keeps stealing all the freaking long touchdowns that Etienne could score. So I like that call. I think, like you said, this is a tournament is a what kind of where you want to use Etienne this week.
If he had started out like where we were drafting Chase Edmonds this year, then
Right.
people would be like, this season's going all right. I think he's going to break out. But we were drafting him in round 3, maybe early round 4. So from there, it seems like the season's been awful. So if we reset our thinking on Etienne, then things aren't quite as bad as they seem. The other guy is not as much out on a limb, but Derrick Henry is at 8,200, which is a reasonable price for a guy who gets that much work. And he's at single-digit ownership and projection in our lineup generator right now. He's had 20-plus carries in 4 or 5 games. He's coming off the bye, so he should be fresh. Ran for 114 yards in the first game against the Colts. Also had 5 targets in that game, so they have been mixing him in more in that area. This Colts defense has no Shaq Leonard again this week. He's still returning from the face surgery after he had a broken nose. Also no Kwity Paye, who is the number 2 graded run defender on the Colts defense among Colts starters. So this is a better matchup than it will normally be. We have the 100-yard bonus on DraftKings. We also have Jonathan Taylor back this week. He's $100 cheaper, and I would bet that most people who look at those two are going to want to play Jonathan Taylor over Derrick Henry in this format.
So there you go. You go Matt Ryan to Michael Pittman and Derrick Henry run back. If that hits, I know you'll be winning the tournament this week.
That's right. I'll be swimming in my my 50-cent tournament entry winnings. Wide receiver for cash. What are you playing, Jared?
I'm starting with Amon-Ra St. Brown here. $7,100. It's actually the cheapest he's been since week 2. Now he's off injury report altogether, full week of practice. So I think he's going to be back to a full-time, snap count after being limited last time out. When St. Brown was healthy this season in 2 games, he had 12 targets in both those games. He had double-digit targets in 6 straight games to close last season. So he's just a great target bet for the price tag, especially with no DJ Chark for the Lions. Josh Reynolds is questionable with his injury. I'm not even sure he's going to play. And then it's a tough matchup in general for the Lions passing game, but Amon-Ra St. Brown gets Jordan Lewis in the slot. He has not been great this season. He's allowed 21 catches on 25 targets. So I think that's going to push even more action Amon-Ra St. Brown's way. I think he's a good bet for 10 plus targets in this game.
I agree, and he's also just tied for 11th in ownership projection in the lineup generator right now. So he's well within reach in GPP lineups as well, in addition to being a fairly safe cash bet. I also like T. Higgins for a little cheaper, 6,400 against the Falcons. Chris Godwin, 6,300 against the Panthers. I'm going to have more on T. Higgins on the FanDuel side. I think Chris Godwin, we talked about on Thursday, he's just been healthy. He's been getting the targets. He hasn't scored a touchdown. If he had 1 touchdown to his name right now, I think people would be a little bit more excited about him than they are. I think Zay Jones, because we're talking about needing to find places to save salary, 4,400 for Zay Jones against the Giants is attractive here for cash lineups. He's actually ahead of Mike Williams in target share for the season, according to our historical stats page. And that particular stat category on that page only counts the games that guys have played. So you have Zay Jones who has missed a game. It accounts for that. It doesn't penalize his overall target share for that game. He's sitting 32nd among all wide receivers. So that's not a special number, but if you're inside the top 36 and you're 4,400 on here, that's a good area. That's where we want you to be. That'll work for our lineups here. He's also ahead of Adam Thielen. He's ahead of Hunter Renfrow. He's ahead of Allen Lazard. So again, it's not a special level, but it just kind of speaks to how relatively safe Zay Jones's role is for $4,400. Giants are a negative scoring matchup for wide receivers by our adjusted fantasy points allowed, but they're the 6th friendliest matchup for quarterbacks. So I'm going to go ahead and believe that one more than them actually being difficult for wideouts.
Yeah, I would like to live in the $6,000 range for cash. You mentioned Chris Godwin and T. Higgins. I like both of them. I think CeeDee Lamb is an option as well at $6,800. I mean, the risk with Lamb is just the risk on Dak Prescott coming back from the thumb injury. But we know Lamb's target share has been awesome. It's a good matchup against Detroit. So I think he's an option as well. Zay Jones is the guy, like if you want to go up at quarterback and get a Herbert or Lamar Jackson, I think Zay Jones is probably a guy you're going to have to use instead of one of those $6,000 wide receivers. So I think that is a viable route to go in cash.
I think that if you, I think honestly, Jared, maybe my biggest reason to not play Zay Jones would be so I can play Evan Engram without playing 2 Jaguars pass catchers in my lineup. We'll talk about Evan Engram in a minute at 3,300. So if that's where you are, if you want to play Evan Engram at tight end over the other guys, that'll save you salary. Matt Collins at 4,600, I think, is in play. He's not as safe a target bet as Zay Jones, but he's in a Raiders offense that's not going to have Darren Waller. It's got a very questionable Foster Moreau, and Hunter Renfrow is also questionable with a hip injury that popped up during the week. So by the time we get to Sunday, we might have Matt Collins and Devontae Adams, and then I don't even know who else would be on the field for him.
Now, Hollins is questionable too. He was limited all week. He seems like a safe bet. He seems in better shape than Hunter Renfrow for sure. But
what are they doing out in Vegas? They got to rest a little bit over there. Actually, I were there in Vegas. I know what they're doing.
Coming off a bye too. I can't believe how banged up they are.
Yeah, they're probably not staying properly hydrated out there. It's in the desert. GPP side, what do you like for wideout?
So I like both the 49ers wide receivers. I'm not going to get to Jimmy Garoppolo as a tournament quarterback, but I do like playing, either Debo or Ayuk or Kittle, I guess. So, one of their pass catchers in tournament lineups. Talked about the spot for the passing game on yesterday's pod, but, the Niners have been a balanced offense since Garoppolo took over. The Chiefs are a bottom barrel pass defense. It could be a game where the Niners are playing from behind. Deebo Samuel has seen a 27% target share from Garoppolo over the last 4 weeks. So, the rushing hasn't been there anymore, but the passing volume has been strong. So if you get 35 to 40 attempts at a Garoppolo, that's going to mean a big target game for Deebo Samuel. And then Brandon Ayuk's at a 21% target share. So, not quite at Deebo's level, but he's also just $6,000. So I like getting one of those Niners receivers in lineups this week.
And Deebo's certainly going to get more ownership than Brandon Ayuk. So, I like both of those. And I very much like that Deebo is actually working as a wide receiver now, and that he will continue to do so now that they got Christian McCaffrey in the backfield. I mentioned Alec Pierce at low ownership, solid with Matt Ryan. Mike Evans, I want to highlight, 6,900. So he's been in that range all season now. I looked back to see if he was down from where he just had been, but they haven't put up the numbers yet to pump up Mike Evans's price, because he started the season in the 6K range. He has 6+ catches in 4 straight meetings with the Panthers. He has touchdowns in all 3 of his meetings against Carolina with Tom Brady as his quarterback, 4 total touchdowns in those games, at least 6 catches in all of those, at least 77 yards in all of those. And like I said, at least 1 touchdown in all 3 of those. So, it's Mike Evans. So all you have to do is say, yeah, I think that Tom Brady and Mike Evans are going to be okay in this game. And he makes sense if he's in single-digit ownership.
Yeah. Yeah, I have Evans and Williams and Mike Williams on my list, and the rationale is they're 5 and 6% owned. I think if those receivers are single-digit owned, they're always good tournament plays because they both have the upside to go for 100 yards and a couple touchdowns. I do think Mike Williams' ownership will climb with people seeing that Josh Palmer's out and then Keenan Allen's iffy, but we'll see where that goes over the next couple of days. And then the last receiver I had, Michael Gallup, another guy who you could use as a pivot off of CeeDee Lamb. Gallup not as strong a straight-up play, but he's going to be lower owned. He's just $5,100. The playing time has been there since he came back from the ACL 3 weeks ago. He also has an 18.5% target share over the last 3 games. So again, if Dallas is going to start throwing it, 35 times a game now instead of 25, that's going to mean a couple extra targets per game for Gallup. He also, of course, gets the great matchup against the Lions.
And even if they don't make quite the leap in passing volume yet, it should be more efficient than it was with Cooper Rush. So
sure.
I was a little bit worried when I saw Michael Gallup behind Noah Brown in routes last week, but the previous 2 weeks, Gallup was ahead of him coming off of his injury. So, I'm not worried about that aspect of his role.
Brown's not a bad play either. He doesn't excite me as much as Gallup, but he's a bit cheaper than Gallup even. And I think, as you alluded to, he's been out there for close to 100% of their pass plays.
He's Mac Hollins in Dallas.
Yeah. Yep.
Tight end for cash. You can play Evan Engram at 3,300. We'll see. I might just be there and not playing Zay Jones. We'll see exactly how all the 6K guys fit together along with a 5K quarterback. If you need to reach below that, though, it looks like Cade Otton to me at $2,700 over Foster Moreau, who's questionable, over Greg Dulcich, who has a questionable quarterback. Cade Otton got 7 targets, caught 6 of them in week 5 with no Cameron Brate. We got no Cameron Brate this week. So that plus 2,700, that's the case.
Yeah, Otton's my guy for cash. 91% of the pass routes in that game, Cameron Brate missed. It's like Mark Andrews and Travis Kelsey, who are up in that range for routes. So that's a great mark. The Panthers are 4th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, but Football Outsiders has them 23rd in tight end coverage. It's not a matchup I'm worried about. I think Brate's, a pretty solid touchdown bet, at least, at this level of tight ends, considering the Bucs implied total this week.
Mm-hmm. Evan Engram, you could use him across formats here. If the $600 doesn't matter, you can go ahead to Evan Engram. There's no matchup truly better than the Giants for tight end scoring so far. And I say truly because if you look at our fantasy points allowed page, you're going to see Seattle way above everybody else. It's broken. It's going to be broken all season because of that Taysom Hill game where he ran for 3 and threw for 1. There's just no way to read that number. So I'm going to forget Seattle against tight ends, and I'll count the Giants number 1 right now.
That's fair.
GPP side, what do you like at tight end?
So I mentioned George Kittle. I think he's coming in at just 7% ownership. Had a nice game last week. I still think there's upside for even better than he did last week. So I like him at 5,300. David Njoku, 4,200, coming in at just 4% projected ownership. Leads all tight ends in receiving yards over the past 4 weeks. He's 6th in expected fantasy points at the position over that span. And Baltimore, 29th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Football Outsiders says them 21st in tight end coverage.
Yeah, I'll be talking about David Njoku on the FanDuel side in just a few minutes. GPP, I'm curious to see Dalton Schultz's ownership projection over the weekend because there's not one in our lineup generator right now. He's not going to be 0% owned. So I'm curious to see what that number sits at as we get to Sunday morning. $3,600 is really cheap for what he is when healthy and Dak Prescott's healthy. He is off the injury report this week, despite the knee that basically took him out of the past 2 games. Dak Prescott is back. We'll see about him and that thumb, but Dalton Schultz could be a cheap way to buy into the Dak Prescott return without going for the higher owned, higher priced pieces. And the Lions are just a terrific scoring matchup for every position. So we don't have to worry about the matchups specifically here. What I'm not going to do this week is try to go up to Travis Kelsey or Mark Andrews. You mentioned Mark Andrews' injury risk. Travis Kelsey's got the tougher matchup. Like, neither of them has an easy matchup this week. Travis Kelsey has the tougher matchup with San Francisco, who rates well, both in DVOA coverage against tight ends and fantasy points allowed to the position.
Yeah, that's what I'm struggling with most, just thinking about my tournament lineups right now, is what to do with those 2 guys. Because I do believe that generally getting to one of those guys is the right move. It might not be this week, though. But on the flip side, I think everyone's going to go cheap tight end this week. So I do think Andrews and Kelsey are going to come in. I think they're going to come in even lower than we have projected it right now. So to me, if I play a Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes lineup, that's where I'll get to those elite tight ends. I probably won't play them as one-offs.
Mm-hmm. Defense, Browns at 2,400 against the Ravens, Jets at 2,600 against the Broncos. If I'm staying cheap, I think those are the ones I'm going for over. If you look in the lineup generator, we got Falcons, we got Texans, we got Lions up there. I honestly don't like any of those in their matchups this week. Browns against the Ravens, they could give up 35 points, or Lamar Jackson could have a rough game again. So it's a risk, but that's what you're buying at $2,400. You're just basically hoping there's a turnover, a touchdown, whatever. Jets, I like the matchup because we either get an iffy Russell Wilson playing on a less than 100% hamstring who has not been very good this year, or we get Brett Rippon. So either one of those is a good option.
Yeah, it's going to be Jets for me in cash. I think they're a better defense than the Browns, and they have a much better matchup here. Denver already 27th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to opposing defenses. And now, like you said, it's either going to be a banged up Russ Wilson or a Rippon. So it'll be Jets for me in cash.
If we're in a position where the salary doesn't matter that much, I think if you get into the low 3K range, there are a lot of options here. Jaguars 3,100 against the Giants. Giants have been a negative scoring matchup for team defenses this year, and we would not have guessed that going into the year, but they are still allowing the second highest pressure rate. So the biggest change has been Daniel Jones not turning the ball over that much. That could happen in any given game. So with that high pressure rate, I still think there's some upside. Titans 3K against the Colts. Colts have been the 3rd best scoring matchup for defenses. Don't play him in the same lineup as Matt Ryan and 2 of his receivers, but I mean, actually, that could even be something that works out, right, Jared? Maybe he throws 3 picks. Maybe he has Andy Dalton's game from last night where he throws 2 pick sixes, so all of a sudden he has to throw 4 touchdowns to make up for it.
I was going to say pick sixes are excellent for tournament lineups, so that it could work. And we see crazy stuff like that win tournaments every week. So I like those ideas. 2 other kind of off-the-wall plays for tournaments. The Chiefs, again, I kind of like the spot for the Niners passing game here. But we know it's Jimmy Garoppolo in games where, he's forced to drop back 40 times. Like, he has implosion potential. So I think the Chiefs for 32, they're going to be 1 or 2% owned. And then down at the cheap end, the Lions, kind of same thing here. Like, if Dak Prescott isn't right with that thumb, it's a bad Lions defense. But if Dak's not right, that could mean a couple of turnovers. And that's kind of all it takes at defense.
Yeah, my thought when I see it is to avoid the Lions, but I've talked about Dak Prescott being not risk-free coming back from his thumb injury. So yeah, that's a reason to go ahead and take a shot with the Lions. And, if you don't want to play Jimmy Garoppolo as a quarterback for DFS, Debo and the Chiefs defense could be an interesting play from that game, because if they do fall behind, then they have to throw the ball more. Jimmy Garoppolo is definitely a risky guy, and you get a lot of targets for Debo Samuel. So it could be one of those goofily correlated plays.
For sure.
That's going to do it for this Week 7 DraftKings podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can play around with the lineup generator. You can build your own lineups on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo. You can also find Jared's articles highlighting top picks for cash and GPP entries on DraftKings. If you're watching us on stream, stick around. We're going to take a 5 to 10 second break, and then we'll be back to do the FanDuel show. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, October 21st here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 7 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, Jared Smola. Jared, for QB and cash, what are you playing on FanDuel this week?
Kind of the same deal here as we talked about in DraftKings. Like, I want to play Geno Smith for $6,800. But if there's no Tyler Lockett, I'll probably get off him. It's easier to fit the higher priced quarterbacks on FanDuel. I do like Justin Herbert here for $8,100. Pass heavy Chargers offense. That's not going to change in this matchup against Seattle. Seattle is 26th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. They're 29th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. And, despite the Chargers' struggles last week, they do have the second highest implied total on the week at 27.5 points. So, the bookmakers are not worried about this Chargers offense, especially in this matchup.
Yeah, Justin Herbert's my starting point here, $8,100. I think we can get to him salary-wise on FanDuel this week. Seattle is the fourth best scoring matchup for quarterbacks by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. Herbert has lagged the past 2 weeks in fantasy production, but he was seventh among quarterbacks in fantasy points through the first 4 weeks. So it's not like we're worried about him overall. He seems safer to me than Geno Smith and Dak Prescott. We talked about the injury with Tyler Lockett. We talked about Dak Prescott's thumb. There's plenty of upside to Dak this week. There's also the downside risk of him not having played football in a while. Maybe the thumb being something less than 100%. So, you can lean to either one of those guys who are cheaper than Justin Herbert if you feel better about either of them. But Herbert's going to be my starting point, and I'll just go down from there if I need to fit other things that I want in my lineup.
Yeah, I think Tom Brady's the other guy I'd consider. You're saving $700 off of Justin Herbert, and he still seems safe to me. If you expect them to go pass heavy again, unlike what they did last week, I think Brady's a pretty safe bet at that price tag.
On the GPP side, if you check the lineup generator, we've got Justin Herbert, we've got Geno Smith, Dak Prescott, and Lamar Jackson well ahead of the rest of the quarterbacks in ownership projection. So, Jared, how does that shape who you're picking for your tournament QB here?
Yeah, none of the ownership projections, they're all between 10 and 12%. None of those are high enough to get me off those guys. I do think Dak Prescott's interesting as a tournament play. Like, that there's downside risk because he's coming off injury to his throwing thumb. But if he's healthy, Dak Prescott in this matchup against the Lions, there's upside for him to lead the slate in fantasy points. So I think he's worth a look in tournaments. And same goes for Lamar Jackson. He has that ceiling. Patrick Mahomes is an interesting one too. It does seem like the Niners defense is getting healthier, but we know Eric Armstead's out. What's his name? Tofunga. Tofunga. He's questionable. Travarius Ward is questionable. So, and we saw that defense struggle last week against Atlanta. So I kind of want to see about those injuries. But if those two secondary pieces are out, I think Mahomes is a pretty interesting tournament play.
Yep, Halafoa Tofunga. I like Joe Burrow at $8,300, $200 more than Justin Herbert. I think that's going to help his ownership rate. He's got much better weapons at this point than Herbert does with the injuries to the Chargers, and just as good a matchup as Herbert has this week. If you look at the team projected totals by the Vegas numbers, we got the Cowboys and Chargers tied at 27.5. Bengals are next at 26.75, so less than a point behind the Chargers, behind the Cowboys. Burrow had a big game last week, so we don't have to say, I think he has it in him. We saw it. It was there. The Falcons are the third most friendly QB scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. Jamar Chase, he's somebody you consider playing with Joe Burrow. Maybe you just go ahead and play him. He's sixth in projected ownership among wide receivers. So I think, that's not a level that alters anything that you're planning with him. I think that's lower than you might anticipate him being coming off a 2-touchdown game. So maybe that's another mark in favor of playing that Bengals stack. We've also got T. Higgins at $1,400 less than Jamar Chase in salary. And I think both of those guys are very similar bets in terms of what we should expect to get from them in this game in terms of both floor and ceiling. So I'll talk more about T. Higgins when we get down to receivers, but I like stacking the Bengals in this game.
Yeah, Burrow's interesting on FanDuel just because where he's priced. He's priced close to Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. I think that is going to keep his ownership down relative to where it's going to be on DraftKings.
Mm-hmm. Got anything else for tournament side here?
Nope.
I think that Matt Ryan is in play on the sneakier end. Jimmy Garoppolo is $100 less, so he might be in play, but I would rather play Matt Ryan. Each of these guys, 2% projected ownership in our lineup generator right now. Chiefs and Titans are both positive matchups for quarterbacks. So I'm looking in that range if I want to save some salary and pay up somewhere else. Running back for cash, Jared, what do you like?
Yeah, Josh Jacobs is priced better here. He's not as big a value on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings. I'm still going to play him in tournaments. I think, he's the best bet for raw fantasy points among running backs on this slate. He has 62 carries and 16 targets over his last 3 games. He's averaging 24 FanDuel points per game over that span. Raiders 7-point home favorites on Sunday against the Texans, 26.25 point implied total. And Houston is 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs.
I love Joe Mixon's salary on FanDuel this week at $7,400. The usage has absolutely been there. If you look around him in not only the rankings, but in our FD dollars per point, you see a bunch of 8K running backs around him. And that's because those guys have gotten the same usage. They've also been finding the end zone. Joe Mixon hasn't been as lucky in that range, but this offense is getting better. The matchup is terrific. Atlanta's not going to stop Cincinnati from doing anything, despite what you might have seen against San Francisco last week. So I'm going to go ahead and play Joe Mixon in cash this week. Kenneth Walker's a little bit expensive relative to everybody else over here. I think he's still a pretty good bet, but there's a chance that Seattle falls behind in this game and takes the ball away from him, don't you think?
Yeah, I prefer Breece Hall, who's $300 more. I just feel safer about his passing game role if the Jets do fall behind. And I think there's a much lesser chance the Jets fall behind than the Seahawks do. So if I can afford to, get the 300 extra bucks to get the Breece Hall, I'd rather use him in cash.
Now, on the tournament side, if we look at the projected ownership in the lineup generator, we've got Josh Jacobs, Kenneth Walker, Joe Mixon, all at 20% plus. Are any of those guys in your tournament plans?
Yeah, they all are, because running back's the position where I am willing to go chalky, because I think it's the most predictable position. We're just looking for the volume. So I will have those guys in tournaments. The two off the board guys I might play, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. I feel like I've been playing them a lot in tournaments. It's paid off a couple times. Man, this Ravens defense, we started the year, attacking it with passing games, but the Ravens are now 10th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, 24th against the run. They're 20th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. They're allowing 4.5 yards per carry to running backs. And for Hunt especially, Baltimore is also bottom 4 in catches and receiving yards allowed to running backs. So it's been a good matchup for backs on the ground and in the passing game. Obviously you have to pay a bunch more for Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt for $5,800. I think he's a really nice value, and he's still going to be single digit owned.
Yeah, I think that missing nose tackle Michael Pierce is not. I'm sorry. Never mind. He used to be a Raven, but now he's elsewhere. Anyway, so I agree. That's a matchup that has changed from what we expected. Kareem Hunt has not put up big numbers against the Ravens over the past 2 years, so I was hesitant to play him, but I looked at the same DVOA numbers that you were talking about too, and I can't argue with that. So on the tournament side, I think betting on Browns running backs is a good idea. Derrick Henry more expensive here than he was on DraftKings, so I'm less interested in him over here. Jonathan Taylor, by comparison, $1,200 cheaper. Are you getting any Jonathan Taylor in this week against the Titans?
I probably won't get there. I don't think he's a bad play at the price tag. Tennessee's been tough against the run, though, and they totally limited Jonathan Taylor in their first matchup. Maybe I'm overrating that. Taylor, I think, can win in any matchup. But there's just too many other better running back plays for me to get to JT this week.
And just to correct, I was looking at Michael Pierce, and he's wearing a Vikings jersey in the headshot, but he is with the Baltimore Ravens now. So I confused myself twice in looking him up. So he is on IR. He is missing from that run defense. He is certainly a mark in favor of playing Browns running backs against the Ravens. And folks, that's a lesson in looking things up as you're talking live. Sometimes you just get yourself confused and stop making sense. So we'll move on to wide receivers now, Jared. And I think cash, you just start with CeeDee Lamb, right?
Yeah, I'm starting with CeeDee Lamb, who 32% target share so far this season. And now he's going to get probably more passing volume and more efficient passing from Dak Prescott and the great matchup against the Lions. I think DK Metcalf is just as good a value, $6,900 for DK Metcalf. He's wide receiver 15 in salary, wide receiver 5 in our projections. And those projections are still assuming that Tyler Lockett plays. Like, if Lockett does not play, that's going to push more target share Metcalf's way. So I think he's a big value at that price.
I agree. CeeDee Lamb, just to get back, 3rd in the league in target share, 5+ catches in 5 straight games this season. His catch rate, though, 55% versus 66% over the previous 2 years. His yards per catch are down 1.5 versus last year's number, which had Dak Prescott for almost the entire season. I think he missed one game last year. He's also been running from the slot 58% of the time. So we've seen Detroit a couple times so far play an outside receiver a little tougher. So if there's any concern for that, there's less of a concern here because CeeDee Lamb spends a lot of time inside the formation where Detroit does not have a whole lot to go against him. T. Higgins is somebody else that I'm considering for cash here. He trails Jamar Chase in our FD dollars per point this week, but just as good a floor bet at $1,400 less in FanDuel salary. His target share, too, has been 24.8% over his 4 full games this year versus Chase's 26.4%. So very close to Chase's usage when he's been healthy. If you look at the number overall, if you check our historical stats page, that number is going to be different because T. Higgins had one game that he left at halftime against Dallas with the concussion. He had another game where he appeared briefly, allegedly. I didn't even see him on the field in that game before he disappeared with the ankle injury. So those two things are penalizing his target share overall. If you cut out those 2 games and everything else involved in those 2 games for his sake, he's right with Jamar Chase in catch rate. He's also beating Jamar Chase in catch rate and yards per reception on the year, 70% catch rate for T. Higgins. So he's just been a very reliable guy when he's actually been on the field and healthy to this point.
Yeah, and Higgins full practice on Thursday and Friday and not on the final injury report. So I do think he is safe to use in cash.
GPP side, what do you like at wideout?
So I'll mention Brandon Ayuk here again, $6,300 on FanDuel. I think this, could be a game the Niners have to go pass heavier than they want to if they fall behind the Chiefs. And the Chiefs are 29th in Football Outsiders pass defense, DVOA, 23rd in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. I also like Allen Lazard, $6,600, just 6% projected ownership. Over the last 4 weeks, Lazard's averaging 7.8 targets per game on a 21% target share. He's 15th among wide receivers in half PPR points per game over the last 4 weeks. And he gets Washington, who is dead last in our adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I'm just surprised Lazard is not projected for more ownership at that price.
Mm-hmm. I mean, nobody likes Allen Lazard at this point. There were some fans of him back in draft season, but at this point, it's like he doesn't have the ceiling to pay off for me in DFS. Mike Evans, 7,600 against the Panthers. Mike Williams, 7,800 against the Seahawks. Michael Pittman, 7,500 against the Titans. All those guys sit at single-digit ownership projection in the lineup generator now. I don't think any of them should end up there. So if they stay there as of Sunday morning, I think they should all be in the plans for building tournament lineups. Amon-Ra St. Brown is at 10% at 7,500 against the Cowboys. I think that that's still lower than he should be. So if he stays down there, I would go for him as well. He's still 7th among wideouts in target share for the season, despite that one game right before the bye where he played limited snaps. That's included in that target share. So his target share is even higher than that. So that's somebody that we know is going to get the ball, probably going to be in a game where his team is trailing. We know the upsides there. We've already seen it this season. So I think he's squarely in play here.
Yep, agreed. I like him this week.
Tight ends for cash. And actually, I say cash, but Jared, is it just David Njoku for everything at 5,700 this week at tight end?
Cash for sure, and he's projected for 5% ownership, so he's definitely in play for tournaments too. I mean, I think he should be in the mid 6s in FanDuel salary. He's 5,700. Njoku leads all tight ends in receiving yards over the last 4 weeks, 308 receiving yards over his last 4 games. And Baltimore has not been a good tight end defense. They are 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end. So easy cash game play for me. I mean, there's other good options. Kate Otten at $4,900 and Greg Dulcich is $4,000. But I would definitely prefer to spend the extra money to get up to Njoku.
Don't throw any Cade Otton or Greg Dulcich into the David Njoku hour. Come on, 5,700 as you mentioned. We don't need to go down to that 4K range. And beyond the numbers that you mentioned, the team is a 6.5 point underdog, so that favors the chances of Cleveland having to catch up and throw the ball. In these lineups where we're not betting on them actually winning and running the ball plenty like we are our tournament lineups. You mentioned the friendly matchup. They're also 21st in Football Outsiders coverage DVOA against tight ends. So David Njoku is definitely my primary guy here. GPP side, like I said, for DraftKings, I'm curious to see how many people are playing Dalton Schultz because he's cheap and he's been a favorite target of Dak Prescott when healthy. Yeah,
$4,800 for Schultz. Like he's a guy that's just going to be totally ownership projection dependent for me. Like if he's going to be popular, I'll probably, say he's risky with the knee and with Dak's thumb, and I'll stay away from him. But if he's like single digit owned, I think he makes sense for the price tag and the matchup. I think also down there, Foster Moreau, I think $4,600 on FanDuel here. He averaged close to 5 targets per game, 41 yards per game in the 6 games that Darren Waller missed last season. The Raiders have a pretty high implied total this week. Texans 24th in adjusted fantasy points, a lot of tight ends. So I think this is a good place to use Foster Moreau.
Mm-hmm. I can get behind him as an entity. It's tough for me to get behind Foster Moreau after one practice this week and being questionable for the game, because I just see me being like, oh, I got him at 2% ownership, and then first quarter they're like Foster Moreau out for the day.
Wait, we've been saying Moreau is questionable. He's off the final injury report.
Was he?
Yeah,
maybe the Raiders didn't have their thing updated.
Yeah, he went limited full, and he's off the injury report. So he's good to go, and Darren Waller is ruled out. So
what am I doing here, Jared?
This is what happens when we do this, when we're just getting it. It's a West Coast team. They just posted it.
I mean, honestly, I swear I looked at it before and it said out limited questionable. And now it does say limited full. I swear that was what I read. So, all right, I guess I'm wrong. Foster Moreau makes sense. I'm with you on it.
Perfect.
I don't have any other tight ends. So let's move on to defense. What do you like?
For cash, I always want to go cheap. I'm going to go with the Bengals this week. $3,600. They've been a pretty solid defense this season, and they're at home for Atlanta. Atlanta's not a great matchup. They run so much. I think it kind of limits the upside for defenses, but I think floor-wise, the Bengals are a pretty safe bet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bengals are fine here. I like them at 3,600, more than the Falcons at 3,300 in their matchup. You'll see them close together in the lineup generator, but that's because the Bengals have been a positive matchup overall. I think they were playing much worse over the first few weeks, or much more erratically at least, than they are right now. So I would rather not play the Falcons here. Chiefs 3,700 against the 49ers are interesting. If we have the salary left, I think the Bucks at 5K against the Panthers are obviously like the highest upside one here. We might get a shutout in that game. Vegas, even like the numbers say, we've got 13 as a team total for the Panthers in this game. I don't know if the Vegas numbers are capable of going lower than that for a team total.
I haven't seen them go lower, so I'm not sure. It seems like Dallas is getting lost among the elite defenses this week. They're projected to just 2% ownership. That pass rush against Jared Goff, if Goff is forced to drop back 40 plus times if they're playing from behind, that could bring a lot of upside for the Cowboys defense.
Yeah, $4,700 there. They're 7-point home favorites, so I agree with them. Jets 4,300, a little bit sneaky as well against the Broncos with either a questionable Russell Wilson or Brett Rippon in that lineup. So there are a number of options here. I don't think that we're going to get a dominant one in terms of ownership projection to actually sway the decisions that we're making here.
Yeah, I agree.
That's going to do it for the Week 7 FanDuel podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can play around with the lineup generator and build your own lineups for FanDuel, DraftKings, and Yahoo DFS play. You can also find articles from Kevin on top picks for cash and GPP lineups on FanDuel this week. For Jared Small and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Shasta, and thanks so much for swimming with us.